Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. If you're on the West Coast like me, wherever you're calling from, we're going to get started. And so today's session is specifically on the topic of pricing for SaaS startups and how to fix any pricing mistakes with your current model, your strategy. And joining me today is Kyle from OpenView. He's a partner at OpenView Ventures, our friends over there and over in Boston on the other side of the continent. My name is Tony Yang. I'm head of growth here at Mucker. I'm super excited to have Kyle join us in this presentation because the topic of pricing is a very important one and often comes up quite frequently in our discussions. Even just this week, I've had, I think, 2 or 3 portfolio companies discuss pricing models and approaches. So it's a very important topic. Kyle, if you haven't heard of him or follow him, Kyle, you didn't ask me to do this, but Kyle runs a newsletter called Growth and Hinge. I've been a subscriber for several years now, even before I joined Mucker. So for those of you, if you are an internal student of growth like myself, highly recommend go and check it out, go and subscribe because there's a lot of good content in there. Let me turn it over to Kyle because we've got a lot to cover and there's a lot of great content. So Kyle, thank you. Please take it away.
All right, thanks, Tony. And while I am based in Boston, I was born in SoCal and was there until I was 15. So I'm still more of an Angels fan than a Red Sox fan. And so hopefully I'm an honorary SoCal person to this day. But yeah, diving in here, when we think about SaaS pricing, you might be thinking there's probably a better way of doing things than the way you've currently approached it. And if you're thinking that, you're probably not alone. Only 6% of folks who we survey say that their pricing model aligns perfectly with the value the product delivers. So a couple things here. One is this is an area that you can constantly improve, and you can think about pricing the way you think about your product itself. It'll constantly get better as you learn from the market. But the second thing is you have to get comfortable with this never being perfect. You're not going to just wake up one day and brainstorm a pricing model that works great for everyone. There's always going to be trade-offs. And so as long as you know what the North Star is, what you're optimizing for, and what your pricing strategy is, you can get comfortable with making changes incrementally that get you closer and closer to that North Star, but you're never going to get to perfection. So why is this important? I think we talk a lot about in the startup community, especially earlier stage companies, we talk a lot about finding product market fit. I'd argue pricing is a really important part of that. I sometimes refer to as product market price fit. You should be looking to find a product opportunity that serves a strong enough need that customers are willing to pay for it. And they're willing to pay enough for it that you can build a large and enduring business around it, a profitable go-to-market motion around that opportunity. And our friends at First Round Capital did a founder survey, which they do every year. And they looked at founders who struggle to raise capital versus those who find raising capital to be a piece of cake. And the ones who struggled were 3 times more likely to say they monetized too late, twice as likely to say they picked the wrong business model, and 40% more likely to say their burn rate was too high. So again, a symptom that they didn't have product market price fit or didn't have product market price fit early enough in the journey. And in my role, I do a lot of things, wear a lot of hats at OpenView, but all those hats aside, my favorite topic is certainly SaaS pricing. It's where I started my career. I joined Simon Kucher right out of college and was there for 6 years working with generally later stage SaaS companies on their pricing and packaging. So many pre-IPO or post-IPO SaaS companies. I then joined OpenView at 7.5 years ago to build out our growth practice. And I've worked with more than 25 of our portfolio companies on pricing changes. There's one company that I've now worked on. This is our 5th pricing change with. So I don't get it perfect the first time either. And along with working with our portfolio companies actively, we try to share as much of what we're learning back with the community. And a few examples are here, like our State of SaaS Pricing survey, our usage-based pricing playbook, and our SaaS pricing ebook. And when I think about all that work with the portfolio and all of our research that we've done, these are the 5 most common pricing mistakes that we see time and again. And the odds are high you're making probably one or more of these mistakes in your business. And if you could correct these, you'd unlock a ton of latent opportunity. And so we're going to walk through these one by one, and we'll pause at the end of each section to see if there's relevant questions there, and then save time at the very end for more open-ended Q&A. First mistake, which you probably heard of before, is that you're too cheap. Now, this isn't a necessarily fatal mistake. It's not something that is uncommon or something to be overly worried about. But to me, what I tend to find is that many startups really don't want anything getting them in the way of acquiring their first customers, right? Getting that feedback from real life users. And so they're hesitant to go in too high, right, in initial conversations. But over time, you hone in who your ideal customer profile is, right? Who finds the most value in what you're building. You build features for that audience. And you start to get much more of a much more proof points and much more of a track record around the value that you're able to provide. But pricing lags all of that work, right? So you've added all of this value that you can capture, and you need to make sure you're capturing it. So if you're an early stage company that's innovative and high growth, and you haven't touched pricing in 6+ months, that's a sign in of itself that you're probably too cheap at this point. And the thing to remember is that B2B buyers don't behave like consumers do, and they don't behave like other startups do. They're simply not as price sensitive. And if I think about my own personal life as a consumer, if Netflix is charging me $15 a month, I'm like, do I really need this? Should I buy the ad-supported plan? If a software vendor charges me $25,000, I go, well, do we have this budgeted? What's the ROI this is going to bring me? Am I able to make a case internally? What's my comfort level with this vendor? Because I don't want to look like an idiot to my peers. It's a very different buying process, buying decision, where price is just not at the top of the list of priorities. And when we survey companies, we've actually asked, what's your average ACV, annual contract value? And we've looked at that over the course of a startup lifecycle, from folks in the seed stage, expansion stage, which we think of as general Series A, Series B, growth stage, which is Series C+, and then exit or IPO stage. So generally, these are the folks with 100 million plus ARR. And you can see, on average, companies increase ACV 60% from seed to expansion stage, 40% going into growth stage, and another 20% in the IPO stage. Now, some of this is getting comfortable selling more upmarket, but a lot of this is designing pricing and packaging to capture more of the value that you're creating. The other thing to share is that we've surveyed folks on, did you raise or did you change pricing in the last year, which is generally, price increase more than a price decrease. And if you did change price, what impact did it have on your ARR growth? And the answers were pretty striking. Only 2% said that the pricing changes led to a decrease in ARR growth. And so think about all the things you can do to your business. How many of them have a 98% chance of leading to positive growth? Not too many. If you then think about how many don't require additional headcount and actually allow you to spend more money in customer acquisition to grow the business, like pricing should be towards the top of your list of priorities. And the median pricing impact is about a 10 to 24% increase in revenue growth, but it generally is higher for companies that are earlier stage innovative companies. And it's, you can expect less growth to come from pricing changes the more mature the software business is. And we can talk much more about how to do price increases without alienating your customer base. Happy to discuss that, but I'll pause here first for Q&A if there is any, Tony.
Yeah, so there is a question that came in, and I'll tack on to that question as well. The slide that you were showing, the average ACV as a stepwise function of depending on the stage. One question from the audience is this showing, I'm assuming they were asking that the ACV, is it per account or company, regardless of the number of users? So I guess the assumption is it's user seat-based license. Okay.
Yeah, average ACV per account. Yep.
Okay, and then if I could tack on to this question, with the increases that from each stage to the next, especially from seed to expansion stage, is it because of the increases coming from additional feature capabilities that's delivering more value that they could charge more of? Or is it a function of seed stage companies where just to get some initial traction, they started off with a lower pricing model and decided to increase as they start to get more traction with the market?
Yeah, it's really hard to tease all of those impacts apart because there's always some kind of combination, right? And in some cases, right, a company goes in lower price than they know they could probably get, but also, builds a lot of features over time as they attract those target customers. And they don't have a natural way of monetizing those features, right? They want to still have those early adopter customers be able to use those features, right? They don't want to build things that no one's able to use. And so there's both like an underpricing relative to what's possible and an under monetization of new kind of innovative features that's pretty common in the early stages. And so part of this increase in ACV is folks either building, deciding, hey, look, we're actually going to build a new package at a higher price point with these features, or we're going to sell these as add-ons that we can kind of cross-sell, upsell into our existing customer base, or we're just going to raise prices. And generally the pricing increases at this point apply to new cohorts of customers. And most folks kind of leave existing kind of early adopter customers on some sort of legacy pricing for a period of time before they migrate them to the new pricing.
Okay. And then, the topic of pricing is a very hot topic, just given the number of questions. We are already getting 10 minutes into the presentation. So I'll just ask one. Yeah, I'll just ask one more and then we'll keep going and see if we can address the rest later on. So does this graph also account for expansion revenue and contracts, land and expand as a pretty common strategy for SaaS startups? Does that include that kind of reality?
Yeah, so it's a mix, right? It's a very average metric. And so for you might think about like for a 5 million ARR business, a lot of your revenue still comes from new cohorts of customers, but an increasing amount of your revenue as you grow comes from older cohorts who are either maintaining their spend or hopefully growing their spend over time. And so at that like seed and expansion stage, most of the revenue and therefore then most of the average ACV is relatively new cohorts of customers who haven't expanded yet. But over time, like at that growth and IPO stage, a lot of the ACV increases come from increasing the ACV within your install base, and that representing a lot more of your overall revenue as a business.
Got it. Great. Thank you. There's a few more questions, but let's keep moving because I know we got a lot to cover, and we'll try to answer the rest of the questions later.
Well, and the transition here I'll make is, so in some ways I think about not showing that section first because honestly I tend to find it's much easier to change the price level or the price point itself than it is to change your value metric, right? And once you set a value metric, it is extremely hard to move away from that metric. And so what is a value metric? That's the primary unit of measure that defines how customers both derive value from your product, but also how you capture that value in the form of pricing. You might think about like a Salesforce, it's based on number of user seats. At Slack, it's based on number of active user seats, which are similar, but it's a pretty important nuance there. At Snowflake, right, it might be based on compute or storage. You think about there's a whole host of different ways that you can design your value metrics. But once you've defined, hey, we're a seat-based business, it actually becomes really hard to move from a seat-based model to a usage-based model, right? And so this becomes really important to get right in the early days. And picking the right value metric can help you both differentiate against competitors and generate more revenue. And I tell a lot of folks, if you pick a value metric that looks exactly like what other folks in your space do, it makes buyers think that you do the same thing or that there's not much of a difference in what you offer. But if you're able to say, hey, look, other companies in this space charge one way. Here's what customers like about it. Here's what customers don't like about it. And here's the really specific things that we're able to do differently than our competition. And if you can design a value metric that really captures that innovation and addresses the real kind of reality of how people want to buy, you can unlock a lot of opportunity. And we've even had, competitors of our portfolio companies use this against our portfolio. So we had a portfolio company in the RFP management space. I think of this as kind of in the sales tech category, and they sold based on how many user seats that a company needed. So how many people were actively responding to RFPs or involved in the RFP response process. It was super predictable for customers to budget against. It was in line with how really every other company in the broader space charged, if you think about Salesforce and so on. But another new entrant came in and they said, hey, actually, we're going to give you unlimited user seats. Don't worry about, giving access to your engineering team to help you get all the right information in the repository. Don't worry about getting access to your security team, to your marketing team, your product team. Give everyone access that might want to touch in RFP response. And that way you're not hurting collaboration. You have all the best data. You have all the best responses to the RFP. We're only going to charge you based on the number of concurrent RFPs that you want to respond to at any point in time. And so if, we're helping you respond to more RFPs and generate more business, then that's great. It's win-win for both sides. And this model ended up proving extremely attractive to customers and actually was something that was an area we had to really define an important play to counteract. But they came to this conclusion that even though this was an accepted metric in the industry, there was still room for innovation, and that innovation could be part of the talk track and positioning and help buyers understand what makes their product very unique and extra valuable to customers. And another example of that, in terms of value metrics, is a portfolio company of ours called VTS. Now, VTS is essentially a CRM platform. There's more than that they can do, but CRM platform for commercial real estate. And in the early days, they charge on a per building basis. So we go to large owners or landlords of commercial properties and offer essentially initially proof of concept, say, hey, bring 3 buildings on your platform. It'll be X dollars per building. It was super simple for reps to pitch, super easy for a landlord to bring on a new building as a proof of concept. But the challenge was this model left a lot of money on the table. And it did so for a couple of reasons. One is that landlords would cherry pick what buildings were managed on the platform. They'd bring their largest buildings, they'd bring like the Empire State Building on, but they wouldn't bring their small suburban office buildings on. And this actually ended up discouraging customers from standardizing on the platform, which meant they didn't benefit from the shared workflows, the shared analytics, all the benefits of having everything on one platform. And so they were never actually realizing the promise of what they were pitching customers because customers were not standardizing on one digital solution. It also meant that they were really undercharging the owners of the Empire State Building and overcharging the owners of the suburban office building. And so after a lot of work and discussions, we moved to a model where we charged on the basis of square feet under management. And that's actually how landlords think about their own properties because they lease on a per square foot cost basis. And it actually made the price look really affordable. It's like, all right, we can lease it for X and you're only costing us Y. It felt really affordable, aligned with customer value, and just really easy to position. And the fun fact there is that after moving to this new pricing model, we were able to significantly increase the square feet under management, but also increase the price per square foot by 70% because there was much better alignment in pricing across all of these different buildings in the portfolio. So I'll pause here. Happy to chat about anything value metric related.
Yes. So 2 questions that come off the top of my head. So one, what are some ways that our portfolio companies, both yours and ours, can they find the right value metrics to focus on? And so that's the first question. Second one is related to this. Can you have multiple value metrics to base your pricing on?
Yeah, I'll tackle the first point or the second point first, and then I'll get to the harder one. So I tend to find there's a primary value metric for just about every product, and it's hard to have multiple of those. It gets really confusing for the customer. So there's one main one. It could be seats, it could be a usage metric, could be whatever. But then you can have other metrics that I call fencing metrics. And so these are, think of these as like a usage cap. So you might have Salesforce might sell per seat, but they have a good, better, best portfolio where the good has capped the number of API calls, right? So that if you really want to integrate a bunch of systems, send data into Salesforce, you got to be on that enterprise plan, that best package. And so you can have some of these other usage metrics that you bake in as a way to either drive additional expansion or nudge people up packages. But at the end of the day, the core of the pricing model should have one main value metric. To your point about how do you pick this, or how do you pick this combination, what I like to do is start by brainstorming like a long list of all the metrics you can think about. There shouldn't be like an infinite number of these, right? Because these are, if you're making something up totally from scratch, it's going to be really hard to sell your customers on this metric. And so you might come up with 10, maybe 12 metric ideas. And then I actually do a t-shirt size scoring, and I like to do it with a leadership team. So everyone's kind of coming to their own view on it. Where is this aligned with the value that the customers see from the product? Does this make it flexible for customers to start small and then expand their spend over time? Is this relatively predictable, right? So the customers don't have to know what their cost is going to be down to the cent, but they should be able to estimate roughly what it is. So even on a usage-based model, it helps to be able to predict your level of spend over time. I also like to see that the metric is scalable. So on average, it grows within the average account and ideally grows by a lot. In my consulting days, I actually worked with telecoms companies as they were migrating from selling based on the number of minutes that you talk on the phone to selling based on the amount of data that you end up using. And that's because minutes were not scaling, right? But data was absolutely scaling. And so we wanted to reorient value metrics towards that. And the final thing is you want to find a metric that you can actually kind of measure and meter against, implement in your systems. And you might look at, like, there was a lot of backlash to Unity's pricing change. Unity in the gaming space started adding a success fee, when folks had their games in production and were scaling. But there was a huge backlash with Unity's customers. They felt it was something they changed this model after like 15 years in business. It was really hard for customers to wrap their head around it. They planned their business around things a certain way, but also Unity didn't have access to this information. And so this was data that their customers would have to provide to Unity, which is really hard to implement. And it's just not a way that, you're constantly going to have, I think, friction points with customers if you don't have a shared source of truth for what this metric looks like. So those are, okay. That's what I like to do. T-shirt sizing against those 5 criteria. And then you should get pretty clear consensus of, maybe 2 or 3 good metric candidates. And then you have to probably do some testing in the sales process or through an interview environment, but that'll really narrow down the options pretty quickly.
Got it. Okay. And if we could ask one last question for this section, or this second section, do you consider a seat-based or number of users to be a value metric compared to usage-based pricing, or are there subsequent value metrics that helps you understand whether or not those 2 models are the right model? If that makes sense.
Yeah, so seats are certainly a value metric. And then within usage, that it's kind of one category of metrics, but there's a lot of sub-metrics. But similar with seats, seats, you've got number of total named users, you've got number of concurrent users, number of active users. There's a lot of different potential metrics, even within seats. So I tend to think about, like, the category first is the categories are probably something around seats, something around product usage, something around actually like ROI, like a hard ROI delivered by the product, and then something around like customer size or customer metrics. So like the customer has between 500 and 1,000 employees, so the price is Y, or the customer has 1,000 to 5,000 employees, so the price is Z. So those are the main categories. And then when you think about the specific metrics, those are going to be relevant to, whatever's most relevant to your product. And so I would get to that like second click, as opposed to keeping it as like we're usage based. It's like, well, but usage based, are you selling based on number of SMS messages, amount of compute, amount of storage, amount of something else entirely? You want to get to that second level.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. Price mistake number 3 is that you make it hard to buy. And, as just a starting point here, if you follow OpenView or me, we're fans of product-led growth. And the kind of the rationale or how we've gotten here is that the way people build software products has changed. And now also the expectations for how you use and buy software products has changed. So software is now often increasingly easy to get up and running, even by an individual user who's non-technical through, low code, no code tooling, easy to integrate with other tools in your tech stack. And so often the end user is going out, they're finding products to help either their workflow or their team's workflow. They're seeing value in it, and they're going to their boss and telling their boss what they want to buy. And there's more and more of an expectation around the ability to try before you buy, actually see the product, take it for a test drive, and then pay on the basis of value realized. So we think about this trend as towards product-led growth. It's not, an either or. It's not to say product-led growth is the only way to build a business, but it's more a way to say you want to be able to sell to your customers the way they want to buy. And so you might have customers that are very early adopter crowds that really do want to use the product first, like a developer audience. But you might also be selling into an industry that is very tech averse or has a lot of security constraints, and they might have a different way that they want to buy. So make sure you're adapting to how your customer wants to adopt the product. One example that I'm a big fan of around this way of buying is Slack, and which many people probably use and love. And I think what's so interesting about Slack is their freemium motion. So with Slack, the motion from the beginning was that anyone could sign up and use Slack. So it could be a marketing person, it could be a developer, it could be anyone in the organization. Slack's a viral product, so you invite other people to have conversations. And for a while, Slack's kind of a team messaging app. It's more nice to have than it is mission critical. But over time, as everyone's in Slack, you have really important customer conversations and internal conversations that live there. You have really important data that you've collected that you want to go search for and find. And so Slack's pricing model actually allowed anyone to invite a limited number of users into a free instance, but they would charge once you hit a paywall around the amount of usage that you had. And then you'd have to upgrade to a paid plan. They had unbelievably high free to paid conversion, even though you might think of this as like a super generous paywall. And I think that what was the unlock for me in this model is that when you think about a PLG model, you really want to lead with something that's going to put your best foot forward with users, where they can see the best experience of your product and actually start to standardize on it or find production grade use cases. And then you want to have also a clear, compelling event when they know now is the time they need to take out their credit card and buy. And if it's only like I can upgrade to get these other features, that's usually not enough motivation as having a really compelling event or a moment in time, like this usage paywall in Slack's case. And so in businesses that think about this PLG motion, the constant debate is, should I go freemium or should I offer a free trial? We have some data here from some historical data from our product benchmark survey around what funnels typically look like for both businesses. And so you can see for every 1,000 folks that you get to the website, freemium tends to do better at getting those folks to actually sign up for an account because there's a lower barrier to entry, but a much worse job at getting those signups to actually buy. And also the time to purchase is much longer in a freemium model. But it's a little bit more self-serve friendly because folks kind of come in, they use the product, fall in love, and they could maybe buy in the first week or a year later once they hit a limit. So it tends to be more self-serve oriented. And so a lot of folks tend to be debating ad nauseum internally, should we go freemium or free trial? And it's sort of a trade-off, right, between these different perspectives. My view on the matter is why not try both? And so we're seeing more companies implement what we call a reverse trial. And this is where you default folks to an advanced version of the product, generally like the premium version with all the best bells and whistles they have to offer. And that allows you to really show off the best of what your product can do rather than show off kind of an artificially limited product experience. You also create urgency around adoption, right? You have that countdown clock if you've got 14 days to use this. And then at the end of that countdown clock, people could either buy, which you often see a lot of folks buy at that trial period, or they could downgrade to a free version of the product and keep using it. And that gives you a second bite of the apple to convert folks when they hit a call to action in the product, they land on a feature gate in the product, or they hit a usage limit where they become a product qualified lead for the sales team. And so that often actually captures the best of both worlds, where you get the free sign-up rate of a freemium product, but the conversion rate much more like a free trial experience. And so I'm seeing companies like Airtable, Crisp, and Calendly go with this type of reverse trial motion. But freemium free trial aren't the only ways of selling to your customers the way they want to buy. One example I just wanted to end with for this section is Logical. So they were a former OpenView portfolio company that recently had a really successful exit, which is unusual in this environment. They're a legal tech platform, and they started as a traditional SaaS business selling annual subscriptions that were roughly kind of 5-figure ACV. And that helped them scale pretty well out of the gate, as you can see on this blue curve. But growth started to stall, right? The number of customers interested in buying their product wasn't growing at the rate that they were looking for. And the challenge that they were finding is many of their customers, didn't know how much they'd use a product like Logical. These were law firms often. They didn't know how much need they'd have going in because they didn't know what their client case volume was going to be like. They were also really hesitant to buy up front, right, and pay that fixed cost before they get money in the door. And they often relied on services firms, and they would be able to bill those back to their clients directly. And that was much harder mechanically in this sort of annual SaaS paid upfront model. And so Logical tested a pay-as-you-go approach, where you pay a fixed price every month based on how much amount of data that you need. And the idea was we land folks on this very flexible pay-as-you-go plan, and they can move into a subscription if they want to later. So within a matter of a few weeks, actually, after fully rolling out pay-as-you-go, they had signed up more customers than they had over the many year period before that. And then this actually brought them from 0 to 10 million in pay-as-you-go revenue within their first 18 months, which was really changing the direction of the business. And it's because they were finally selling to their customers the way customers wanted to buy. All right, I'll pause here, but I love that example.
All right, there's a bunch of questions, and I feel like we opened Pandora's box, especially since you mentioned product-led growth. There's a whole other talk track. We could dig deeper into that, but I'll just ask one question related to your example with freemium, free trial, and even reverse trial. And the question is, how do you think about pricing and packaging your pricing in a way where you're not inhibiting or adding ceilings or barriers to growth and virality and usage, if and usage leading to value realization of your product from your free into paid? So how do you start thinking about that and how to limit? One quick example, there are several of our portfolio companies that are starting to utilize this kind of product-led growth, self-serve motion with a sales motion for larger deals, and kind of relates to even enterprise versus SMB. So how do you start to effectively think about packaging your pricing subscription so that you're still taking advantage of a self-serve product-led growth motion, but also not shooting yourself in the foot and cannibalizing more value creation at higher subscription level, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. So my general view is that you should think about what are inputs to someone seeing value and what are outputs of realizing that value. So an input might be setting up an integration, inviting a second user, but an output is that, let's actually, SurveyMonkey is maybe a good example because they added survey response limits relatively recently. Monkey, they want people to make as many surveys as possible, and making your first survey and sending it out, getting 5 responses back, that's their activation metric. So that's how someone sees value. They don't want to have any barriers to someone being able to create that survey that they're excited about and get it in the hands of users so they can start collecting that data. But SurveyMonkey puts limits on how many survey responses you can get before you have to pay or before you have to pay more. And what's also interesting with their model is that if you start to go beyond the cap that you've paid for, they're not going to shut down your survey. They're still going to collect that data. They're just going to hide those responses from you unless you want to pay for it. So creating this like nice, hey, look, like there's even more value out here. There's nothing you need to do but pay us a little bit more. I like that they don't shut down the survey entirely, because that just sort of blocks any sort of value realization and creates a bad experience. But that's the kind of mentality that I think about, is that what's that input being able to be able to see value versus what's the output of realizing the value. But in general, I like to set a usage paywall that corresponds with folks actually being successful with the product in a way that's sort of relevant to your ideal customer profile. So not necessarily how like a B2C user, prosumer, or someone else finds success, but how a business user, your core ICP, finds success. And I think a Zoom paywall is a great example too, where Zoom is unlimited for one-on-one meetings. But if you want to have a group meeting with Zoom, which is often like in a client call, a sales call, like an important call with multiple stakeholders, you got the 40-minute time limit before your Zoom shuts down. Now, if it's just an internal meeting at a startup, that's fine. Just you'll let the meeting shut down and then you'll spin up a new Zoom. But if this is a really important external meeting where you want to look good, that's when you really pay to bypass that threshold. And so it's something that speaks to your kind of core ICP who finds the most value in your product and creates some kind of healthy friction for everyone else. The other things I think about is like for your usage paywall, the paywall should be fine so that like 80% of your users actually don't hit it, and only 20% would actually hit those limits. It's a pretty good rule of thumb for where to set it. And then I think about in terms of packages within product-led growth, the initial package or like a self-serve package is probably oriented to like what a small team needs. I don't like selling a package that's just for a prosumer individual user, because that shuts down like collaboration and expansion opportunity. Someone could still maybe use that package as an individual, but we'd find even more value if they use it as a team. But then aligning the initial package around small team type of use case, and then aligning more advanced features and paid plans around more of that company-wide or enterprise adoption. And so rules of thumb are things like, what does the executive care about that manager or director persona doesn't care about? What's important to manage this at scale, right? And so you start thinking about like advanced administrative access, advanced reporting and analytics, advanced security capabilities, advanced SLAs and so on. Those are things that, that individual user or small team, they don't care about at all, but an enterprise might pay 3x, 4x the price just to get access to those features. So that's a quick rule of thumb.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then there's a question that is probably going to be related to what you are about to cover under upsell path. A question just to keep in the back of your mind is, how do we think about add-ons and extra capabilities and features in terms of packaging? So I assume that's a great segue.
We'll get to that next. Someone planted it. So the flip side of being able to acquire folks, right, is that you need to be able to expand them once they're in the door. And we start to think about, what's your expansion rate or what's your net dollar retention, and trying to get that to net negative churn, and ideally north of 110 or 120% net dollar retention. And your best paths of doing that, in my view, are having some sort of feature packaging or add-on strategy, and then also looking at a usage-based pricing opportunity. And so first is around packaging. And so packaging, it's not like, what's the plastic container that you're getting something in? It's how are you bundling different features and services together into a solution for your customer? And here you think about like, you could have an all-in package, like the classic Bloomberg terminal that has everything Bloomberg offers in one very expensive terminal. The flip side of that is you can have a super modular strategy where everything is a la carte as an add-on. I think Twilio is a great example where you literally pay for anything that you want, but it's super customized to exactly the kind of solution that you want to buy, and you're only charged for exactly what you want to use. Most companies don't fall on those extremes. So, all in doesn't provide you a whole lot of expansion opportunity. Modular is so complicated that your customers are making like a million buying decisions, and it's really hard for them to purchase. They often feel nickel and dime, for example, and you want to feel like you're presenting solutions for them. You're the expert, right, of what your product can do, and should be making it easier for your customers to buy your solutions. So folks tend to land somewhere in these three buckets in the middle, either selling packages aligned to a product category. So if you think of like Salesforce selling sales-oriented solutions, marketing solutions, services-oriented solutions, kind of skinning a similar product, but for different audiences or use cases. There's segmented packages, which is kind of similar case. I think LinkedIn's a great example where if you think about LinkedIn, they've got the ability to message people, the ability to search profiles, see who's viewed your profile, and so on. They could have sold that just as a good, better, best package, but they realized recruiters value these features way more than like everyday job seekers. And so they have LinkedIn Recruiter versus LinkedIn Premium, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and so on. And in the early days, there wasn't a whole lot of extra benefit to Recruiter. In fact, a lot of people just use LinkedIn Premium, save money, but they built sort of a product around a willingness to pay and a use case they knew existed in the market. Where most folks land, and where you'll probably land, is good, better, best. This is where, when I look at software companies, about 70% of folks end up with some sort of good, better, best model. And that's where you have an increasing amount of features and services as you move from good to better to best. So it creates this natural upsell path. It also provides a path to monetize new features that you're developing over time. It trains customers that they have to, both give something up if they want a discount or pay more if they want more. And so it's a very natural kind of way of balancing simplicity with having an upsell motion and some flexibility. The other thing, there is still room for add-ons in this model. And the way I think about add-ons here, it's actually the analogy I like to use, and we used it at Simon Kucher, was McDonald's. And so with McDonald's, you normally go in for lunch, right? Or maybe dinner. You go in, you need that main item, that burger, right? For me, it's often chicken nuggets. And then you might buy fries, you might buy soda, but those are things that are nice to have, that if you had to buy them each on their own, you maybe buy them once off, but a lot of times say, actually, I'm good without these. And so when you bundle these together as a package, or they call them, a meal deal or whatever they call them, if you package them as a meal, all of a sudden people buy the whole package and they're really happy about buying them as a package. But McDonald's doesn't bundle things like coffee or apple pie, because those are valuable either to a different type of audience, a different user at a different occasion. And if you bundle those in the package, it actually make the package feel really overweight. And so add-ons work really well if there's a different audience that values the feature than your core audience, or there's a different time when someone values it. And so I look for things that are relatively alienating. Maybe only 10 to 30% of your audience needs it, and the folks that need it are willing to pay a lot for it. And you tend to not want to sell too many add-ons the initial deal, maybe 1 to 2 at most, but those are great upsell paths as folks are really mature in their product usage. That's everything you need to know about packages. And then the other area is usage-based pricing opportunities. So HubSpot, this is their pricing back in the early days, back at Series B timeframe. And HubSpot had a good, better, best model, right? Which is what I talked about. The average company has it. But you can see most of the good, better, best feature differences were around feature differentiation. And there was a pretty big jump from good, which was $3,000 a year, to better, $12,000 a year, to best, $18,000 a year. So while this was simple, it helped them, get up and running relatively quickly. There was very limited expansion within HubSpot's customer base. And because they sold to many SMBs, the churn was pretty high. Their net retention was really struggling. This wasn't putting them on the path to IPO. And so they looked at where can we add some sort of usage-based value metric that allows us to have expansion within our customer base. And so what they did is they added this notion of contact-based pricing, where each package still exists. You buy a package, and each package comes with a certain number of contacts included for free. But as you're successful with HubSpot and you're getting more context you can market to, HubSpot's going to charge you more over time. And what happened is this really worked extremely well for HubSpot. Their net retention jumped from 75% to 100%. And this actually led to both better conversations with customers, better outcomes, and better alignment between what the product team was building and how they can prove that those product features were actually generating the outcomes customers were looking for, because there was now a clear link between product and revenue. So it was a super successful instance that I think is just worth sharing, because people maybe know where companies are today, but they don't realize what got them to where they are today. Oh, I'll pause again.
All right, I'll just ask one question because I know you have this whole one last section to go through. So related to add-ons and features and good, better, best type of stepwise packaging, how do you start thinking about whether or not to bundle a capability in that framework, good, better, best, versus just breaking it out as a separate product even? So moving from multiple subscription levels to more of a multi-product type of portfolio approach. How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I could answer that quickly, but thoughts that I have is that if it's aimed at a different persona than your core persona, right? Where HubSpot has HubSpot marketing automation, they have HubSpot for sales, they have HubSpot CRM. Those are for very different buyers within the same organization. And so if they were to just bundle those all as sort of different packages for the same customer, they'd be missing different entry points into the product. And they'd probably be alienating the audiences because they weren't speaking to the sales persona appropriately. It felt like sales maybe would be an afterthought from the core user base of marketing. So think about the buyers and users, but I also think about budget and are people spending money on these products already through other products? And so it's therefore positioning this as a separate product, allowing you to tap into some search intent that already exists or budget that already exists, where you can maybe get into either more conversations or be able to tap into more budget, because you can sort of get your customers to standardize on one platform with multiple products, which they might prefer over buying each of those products from separate vendors. Those are a couple of things I think about, but obviously there's a lot more to consider, and I feel like we're going to run out of time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. That was super helpful, and I'm sure there'll be opportunities to dig into that particular topic in future days.
Cool.
Great.
So the last thing is, seriously, your pricing is static, and you're going to go through a lot of changes as your company evolves. So at the early stages, you normally have one product, relatively simple pricing. You start adding to that product through new features. You might look at new product tiers, add-ons as you grow through the expansion stage. As you get to growth stage, start going after multiple segments. You have a much larger sales team, and so you have a lot more variability within different sellers. Pricing starts getting pretty complicated because all those add-ons and all those new features you've offered. So you start rethinking about packaging and bundling. And then in the later stage, it's oftentimes about international pricing, managing churn, and so on, and driving kind of multi-product adoption. So pricing needs to evolve as your company evolves, but most companies don't take it super seriously. And sorry for we migrated slide templates, so the data doesn't show super well here. My apologies for that. But the average software company doesn't take pricing all that seriously. They're not doing the research and testing to make better pricing decisions. The average company has done very little research around things like willingness to pay. That's in this green bar. And then very little, if any, price testing. And when you do this research and this testing, you get quotes like this. And this is an actual customer quote from one of the case studies that I mentioned earlier, where a customer told me the price is not material enough to be a factor in the decision. It's not even a blip on the radar. And hearing this is what gave the CEO and the leadership team confidence about changing their strategy. There's a lot of different ways to collect this data. Happy to follow up kind of offline because we'll probably run out of time. But one approach that I'll mention just to plug is this approach called the Van Westendorp on the left-hand side. And with the Van Westendorp, you're normally describing the value proposition that you offer, or maybe kind of demoing the value proposition. And then you ask either in a one-on-one setting or a survey setting, at what price would you consider this to be a bargain? You wait for someone to answer. At what price would this be getting expensive? And then wait for an answer. And then at what price would this be too expensive so that you no longer consider it? And I like to also pause and ask, like, why? Or can you walk me through your thinking? You both get really great insights into how customers think about paying for products like yours. You understand psychological thresholds in their mind of, hey, we actually have to really stay under $1,000 a month or to stay under $5,000 a month. You understand the nuances across different customer profiles of customers like this really need a cheap solution that's more like $200. Customers like this, we can charge $10,000 for the same thing. And then I think the other thing is you just understand that customer perception of, well, I pay this much for Salesforce, and this seems like an add-on to what Salesforce can do. Or if I go beyond X dollars, I need to get my CFO's approval. I'm really hesitant to do that, right? You understand that buyer psychology around pricing. And so that's a type of question that I just think is not asked about enough. So when you're thinking about building a new product, for example, that you want to monetize, in some of those beta customer or beta user interviews, you might want to think about asking some of these questions rather than just asking about product feedback. Other thing is that it's best to ask them to people that are somewhat involved in the purchase decision and not just your individual users, because users are generally very bad at telling you pricing information. It's only has someone that writes the check or is involved with writing the check. The question comes up a lot of like, who should own this work? Who should do this? I just have some different places where pricing lives and some pros and cons on the right-hand side here. I'm not wedded to it living in one function. I think the most important thing is that a function owns pricing, that function operates cross-functionally, right, to bring recommendations to a group that then weighs in and ultimately gets aligned. And that you just really need folks doing the work around pricing, and having an owner is more important than who owns it. And then have some just quick thoughts to wrap up here about how to do this with a lean team or in the early days. So just some signals to think about. It's a good time to be thinking about pricing is, are your customers buying too quickly and without enough scrutiny, right? If no one says no to buying your product because of price, then you're probably underpriced. Or if usage is growing much faster than spend within your customer cohorts, if you've added a lot of value to your product but haven't touched pricing in 6 to 12 months, or if you're going after a new ICP and haven't aligned pricing and packaging to that ICP. And make sure you think about, like, what are your KPIs? Like, how can pricing help you achieve your broader company goals? How do you quantify the business value that you create for your customers, your ROI? You can often capture about 10 to 20% of that overall economic value. How do your customers think about the alternatives to buying your product? Even if you don't have a direct competitive solution, there are always alternatives that are in the customer's minds. And then how do you de-risk pricing changes before rolling them out? And oftentimes that's testing with new cohorts of customers or new sales cycles before migrating your install base. So that's all I had. I don't know if we have any more time for questions, but if I missed your question, you can reach out to me at kyle@ov.vc or on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to help.
Great, thank you. Yes, we are up on time. We answered a bunch of questions throughout the presentation. So for those of you who did ask questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, apologies for that. Again, as Kyle mentioned, feel free to reach out to him via his email or LinkedIn. And also feel free to reach out to me as well, especially if you're a portfolio company of ours. And if you guys are a portfolio company of OpenViews, definitely reach out to Kyle or a fellow team member. And again, like as I mentioned, follow Kyle's newsletter. It's great. Growth Unhinged, or if you search on Kyle's name with Substack, you'll find it. Covers a lot of great content, including pricing. So definitely check that out. And if you are interested in a future session with a different topic, feel free to email my colleague Britton at Mucker Capital. I will mention the third point here, which is we do have an upcoming deadline coming up for our accelerator program. We have an info session next week, and then the deadline is early November. So those of you who are interested, definitely go check out that webpage. Just go to mucker.com and you'll navigate towards the accelerator program, and you'll be able to find information there, or reach out to either myself or Britton. Kyle, thank you so much. This was awesome. I felt like we just like covered the tip of the iceberg, even though there was a lot of really good content and great takeaways. This whole topic of pricing and packaging, and it is such a complex issue or area that I know a lot of our portfolio companies need a lot of help with. And certainly this presentation was a great starting point for that. So thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us. And till next time, we hope that you found this session helpful. Again, we'll let you know when our next session is on a similar topic around growth. So thank you all for joining us and have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Everyone.